You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Merrick Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, of course, it starts out by saying two fans. Well, remains to be seen. Are we going to be two fans? Or maybe not so much. Because today, we're actually reviewing the first two episodes of the Ahsoka series. The long-awaited Ahsoka series, I might add. This one's actually been, it's funny. This is, Ronaldo, he chatted in. He says, hello, my hut gangsters. At first, I thought that said butt. I'm like, whoa, dude. Let's just not start out there.
Yeah.
It's just, maybe let's not go there right away. But yes, hut gangsters, I'll take that one. That one's okay. That one's fine. But yeah, man, this whole series, it's funny because we have been talking about this thing for so long that I have to say, in a way, it was almost anticlimactic when it finally came. I mean, I had to remind myself to watch it because I'm just so used to being in that whole, oh yeah, man, it's coming out, in X amount of months or whatever. And then, of course, for the last week or 2 weeks or whatever, we've been doing this whole, journey to Ahsoka. We had all these special episodes and stuff. And, then when it finally came, I'm like, oh yeah, Ahsoka's on tonight.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, it did kind of have that feeling like, oh, it's finally here. I guess I should watch this thing, huh?
Yeah, well, it's because that's one of the dangers, I think, when they start. I mean, on one hand, it's cool, and obviously we've done a million of these shows, right, where, oh yeah, the summer of 2025 is going to be, whatever, right? Because when Lucasfilm makes all these announcements, but, the danger of that, of course, is that you get so lulled into this pattern of you're always waiting for this thing that when it actually drops, you're kind of like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of a side effect of things, just when you have a whole lineup, and plus when you have a bunch of different content. I think it probably may have a different effect if we had no content at all. But when you do have other shows and things that the franchise is putting out, and then you're eagerly awaiting more shows than others, certainly. But I think just the mere fact that you have other things, other shows that the franchise has released to kind of keep you occupied, kind of quells that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too, actually, because one of the things that's happened over the last year or two is that every few months or whatever, it seems like there's a different show, whether it's an animated show or a live action show or something like that, that you're not going too many months without some. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're interested in everything that pops up, but the point is that there's something for everybody, and that's the spirit in which I hope people are starting to look at some of this stuff. You get a lot of people who are really super critical about certain things. I mean, look, even Visions, which you and I notoriously are critical of, right? I mean, a thing like Visions. Now, again, I have to point out that we actually did kind of like this last season, but it's definitely for a specific type of fan. And, it appeals to somebody in the whole Star Wars universe that's fairly targeted. I'll put it like that. Whereas some of these other things, of course, your Mandalorians, your Ahsokas, your Book of Boba Fett, stuff like that, that has a little bit of a wider audience demographic. But even still, I mean, it's one of those things that with the constant flow of content that we're getting, I don't think it's so much of a be-all, end-all as it used to be. It used to be that a franchise like Star Wars would pretty much live or die based on maybe a film release or something like that. But now, because we're getting a good, steady type of content, and it differs in a lot of ways, I think that you can be a little bit easier on some things. Now, again, I don't really want to go too far into that because, look, we have to hold Disney and Lucasfilm responsible for crap, I mean, it's not like you could just let a bad project go and go, well, I guess they'll just release something, I mean, it's one thing if you don't like something, like David. David notoriously hates Andor. But Andor is not a bad series, it doesn't speak to him, Okay, that's one thing. But when you get into something like Obi-Wan, which, universally everybody went, the story was all right, but the execution was really bad, whatever. It's like, yeah, no, you got to hold people responsible for that. So, to that end, Ronaldo is just getting right into this, man. He's not wasting any time. He's like, overall, these episodes were fun. I really enjoyed it. Not perfect, but very good. And honestly, you and I talked a day or two ago, like shortly after this thing premiered. And that probably mirrors where you and I are at, actually. Where, I mean, overall, I'll just say this. And I got notes. You guys know me with these series, right? I got tons of notes. We're going to be here for a while tonight, I'm just saying. But if I had to, even before I get to my initial thoughts, if I just had to give this like blanket statement, right? I would say that I really enjoy this show so far. But there are some issues. There are some issues. There was some really stupid things in this. Like really dumb. Like really stupid. To where I'm like, are you kidding me with this? But the difference between this and maybe Obi-Wan, because I think that this show, much like Obi-Wan, really did suffer from the volume. The difference is this actually feels like a Star Wars adventure. It is continuing the lore. It's taking the mythology as a whole and it's advancing it. So, overall it was fun. Overall, I think that it's going in a good direction, story-wise at least. And I can let some things go, but they're there. I know that you were alluding to that when you and I were talking the other day. So, like, if you just had to give your blanket overall, this is even before we get into our quote-unquote initial thoughts, but if you had to go, give your overall view of this, where are you going? And then, of course, we got chats.
My overall view of it would be the same. I think it was a good I think it's a good show. I think it actually, like you said, advances the lore. It picks up kind of where things kind of left off in a way, somewhat. There are some definitely good things about it, and then there are some things that were just, for me, glaringly terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can't say at this point, judging off of 2 episodes, which I know this seems weird because it's only an 8-episode series, but based off the 2 episodes so far, I don't hate it, but I liked it. I can't say I love it yet.
Yeah, well, and look, you and I talk about this all the time. You can't, and look, this is even saying that something's amazing, but you can't start going off on how amazing a show is or how terrible a show is or whatever based on 2 episodes. I mean, this is an 8-episode season, right? Just so I'm clear. Okay.
Yep.
Because, they're all over the place with these shows. So
yeah, some are 8, some are 10, some are 12. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Some are 6. Obi-Wan was 6.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan, I think. So with Obi-Wan, I think you could be a little bit more crit. That was about the only one, because with Obi-Wan, like the first 2 episodes is like a third of the show. You're already a third of the way into it, so you can You could actually, that's the one show where I would say maybe it's an exception. But even then, I would say the same thing. Look, bottom line is this. We've gotten 25% of this season so far. It's a good indicator of overall things like overall tone, things like, maybe direction, character development. You could see where they're going with some effects. You could see, things like that, right? Those are the kinds of things that you can, and, or individual things that are contained within this episode. Like things that made absolutely no sense and were stupid, which we'll bring up tonight. But as far as saying, okay, this show is either amazing or this show is terrible, you can't do that on 2 episodes. You just can't. 4 episodes, sure. 2 episodes, not so much. So we got, man, you guys are like active in the chats tonight. Of course it's because it's a review. Just, I'm going to get to these, and then I guess we could start maybe giving our initial thoughts, and then we can start really going into a breakdown. Peter Griffin, of course, joins us, as he does often. He says, the opening was probably my favorite episode of all the Disney shows thus far. I'm trying to think now.
Okay.
I could see that only because the opening of this particular show, even though that's part of where I think it was colossally stupid, the opening part, though, actually did probably feel the most like a Star Wars film of any of the other openings. Like, I'm trying to remember the opening of Mandalorian season. Oh, yeah, Mandalorian season 2 is when it was Timothy Oliphant's character, and he had the Boba Fett armor and all that stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, overall, I could probably say that. I could see that, definitely. And then Peter goes on to theorize. He says, if Merrick is Starkiller, Vader's apprentice versus Ahsoka, Anakin's Padawan could be epic. Thing is, Merrick, look, straight up, there's a lot of people that think he's Ezra. Like, there is seriously a contingent of fans that think that Merrick, I forgot how to actually say it, but essentially that word is like alluding to a werewolf. And so the consensus is because Ezra was really, those Loth wolves and stuff like that. He had a deep connection with them. Werewolf, it's like a transformation kind of thing. There's a big contingent out there that actually think, now look, we're actually presented with the fact that he's just one of the last surviving inquisitors of, Vader's inquisitors, and he hooked up with these people. That's what we know about him so far, at least from the episodes. But yeah, there's people that are theorizing he's Starkiller. There's other people theorizing that he's Ezra. I mean, there's a lot of talk out there for that stuff. So that should be interesting. Peter goes on to say the choreography fight scenes could have been a bit crisper, but I'm sure they wanted Sabine to look like a novice. Yeah, well, as far as that goes, and you can weigh in this part too. So the fight scenes, and just like, let's just take the overall action. For the most part, I thought it was good. Like, there's some clunky scenes, and then there's some really good stuff in there. I mean, again, I'll get, both of us will end up getting to more of the minutia of this as we get into this episode. But, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that, look, you got to remember that Sabine, for the most part, she had some training from Kanan with the dark saber, and that's more or less where she got some of her lightsaber training and stuff like that. Like, she sort of transferred that over. Now, I know that they're alluding that she did become an apprentice of Ahsoka. Not sure how I feel about that yet, but still, it was implied because she even bailed on Ahsoka, or Ahsoka bailed on her, depending on who you believe in that one. Let's just say that her lightsaber skills have lapsed a little bit, and that explains the clunkiness there. But what did you think about the overall like action scenes in this?
Some of the action scenes are really good in my opinion. Um, and then there were others where it's like, yeah, this is not what's it basically.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
mean, I think, and I have most of my concerns. I believe I have an answer for, and I hope that's really what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and not a deeper issue. If that makes sense, but I'll reserve that for later.
No, that makes sense. Because I've been, it's funny because one of the first things that I've done, it's amazing I even had time to do this, but I watched it through twice. And after the second time, I started watching a bunch of other reviews because I wanted to get a sense, number one, of what the actual overall community is thinking. But then I also wanted to compare notes with some of the reviewers that I actually respected, people like John Campea, Christian Harloff, Star Wars Theory, all these guys that are pretty big in the community. And I just wanted to see, Robert Meyer Burnett, people like that. I just wanted to see, like, okay, especially him, because, he's like a director himself. I wanted to see if what I was thinking was more or less on track. I mean, it's not necessarily like I'm looking for validation or anything like that, but, you just want to get an overall sense of, hey, am I the only one picking up on these things? That's pretty much what it comes down to. And nope, I'm not the only one. And even you. It seems like you and I. Now, it'll be interesting when we get deeper into the episode, like what specific things that you and I pick up on. But it does sound overall like we're kind of in the same place, as far as like a lot of the stuff. I mean, again, overall, the difference between this show and something like, say, Obi-Wan is that this show, I was able to sort of put some of these things aside and just enjoy the show and look past a lot of it. But that goodwill won't last forever if we keep having these issues. Ronaldo says, things I like. The action was good. The character interactions were good. The explanation of the character's main objective was established clearly. The dark side Jedi were amazing. I love them. Yeah. Balin's skull and I just blanked.
Is it Mary?
No, it's Hati, Shin, right? Is that her name? Let me go through my notes really, really fast here. I'm pretty sure it's Shin Hati. That's like the dark side apprentice. They were actually really cool. They kind of reminded me of. So Balin's sort of like a Dooku Qui-Gon kind of character, right? And then Shin is sort of like a Maul Obi-Wan character. I mean, when they first land on the ship, it's very much reminiscent of the Phantom Menace when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan landed on the Trade Federation vessel. It was very much the same vibe. Of course, there's also some issues. Some of the stuff, the callbacks were kind of cool, right? Like one of the notes that I have, for instance, that I'll reveal now is that when Balin was going through, once he got on the New Republic ship and he's trying to free some stuff, he's trying to free Morgan Elsbeth.
Morgan.
Yeah. That was very much a reverse of the Leia thing. It's very much exactly a flip of the whole episode 4 thing when Luke, Han, and Chewie and all them went to rescue Leia. I mean, they sort of flipped that, and that was kind of cool. Here's a question for you from Peter, though. He asked, Daryl, did you not love or hate Rebels as well?
No, I love Rebels.
Yeah. I mean, both of us. Now, both of us, it's funny because we watched it together. That was one of the shows that Daryl and I watched from the very beginning all the way to the end together. I remember the first couple episodes, it was starting out like, I don't know, man. The show is a little bit like a kid show to me or something, Um, but yeah, both of us ended up being huge fans of Rebels, which is good because this is basically Rebels season 5. And another thing that I'll let fly here is like a little preview of both of our in-depth comments here. I mean, Daryl has his, I have mine. A preview of mine is, you know, if anybody says to you, you do not need to see the Clone Wars or Rebels before watching the show, shoot them immediately. Because that is absolutely not true. You will be so lost in this show if you haven't seen those things. You can probably enjoy it from some surface, you know, ancillary level or something like that, but dude, no. You absolutely have to have seen those. And this is, especially Rebels, this is like
You
more...
can tell. You could tell because they've often listed like so many things like, oh, episodes you need to watch before watching Ahsoka. When you start seeing that all over the place, that's how you knew that, okay, a lot of this stuff is going to be Rebel centric, as it should. But I mean, essentially, this is season 5 of Rebels anyway.
It is. It
So
really is. But I mean,
you
there's
need
a lot of
you
people
need
that
to have
said that.
backdrop.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people said that, but they went, well, you know, if you didn't see Rebels, you'll still be okay. Yeah, you won't be okay. You won't be okay at all, actually. But now, again, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, though. You know, a lot of times I think that Lucasfilm has been guilty of making content for the casual fan. You know, that's the problem. It's like, look, we've been here since like the 70s, right? Maybe not make it for the casual fan. How about, look, I'm all for making some shows about the casual fan, but not every show. And especially something like this, yeah, you got to make it for the more hardcore fans. You know? I mean, it's kind of like, you know, it's like basically starting to read the middle of a book and complaining because nobody, you know, you didn't read the first half. It's like, well, you know, if you're coming in the middle of some giant franchise and you're whining because you don't get it, it's like, well, yeah, you don't get it because you haven't been on board for everything else. Now, look, before people start crucifying me in the comments or even in the chat here, I'm not talking about, you know, stuff like, oh, I haven't read every comic or every book. Although a lot of the stuff in here, I'm even going to bring up something that basically was started in the courtship of Princess Leia, which, by the way, was an amazing Legends novel. If you want to go back and read that, there's a few Legends novels that I would say are definitely must reads. That's one of them. So there's plenty of stuff in here that is from books, comics, games, you know, just like all kinds of weird content, right? But I understand if people are like, okay, you know, if I haven't read every single peripheral media or whatever, you know, am I going to enjoy the show? But look, something like a big animated series like Rebels that wrapped up like 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe more at this point. Yeah, I don't really have a problem with, you know, that being required before seeing this show. It's called investing in a franchise. Let me see. Did I put this one up already? Oh, no. Peter says, I got Rebels above Clone Wars. It's probably why I like it more. Yeah, well, I can see that. Overall, I would still say, I think I still like Clone Wars better. You probably feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that Rebels is more streamlined because Clone Wars had a ton of filler.
Yeah, and I think the biggest difference between those two shows is that Clone Wars, you kind of knew what had to happen. You know, you kind of know the end in mind, and we're waiting to see how we get there, so to speak. With Rebels, that was a show with characters we knew nothing about, and so because we knew nothing about them, you know, it's like, okay, we know the main characters as far as, you know, we knew Anakin had to survive. We knew Obi-Wan had to survive. Yoda had to survive, you know. we knew all this was Mace because we knew where it was going to end. This leading up to the very beginning of episode 3. So we kind of know who all makes it, what happens, so on and so forth. Now, so a lot of things that happen in the end, we didn't, kind of foresee. Like, of course, we didn't plan for Ahsoka to be in there. So that was a whole new brand new character. And I was definitely kind of wondering, I thought she was going to die, honestly, in Clone Wars, because we don't see her in Revenge of the Sith. So, we kind of like, all right, so she probably has to die at some point. But Rebels being a show where you have completely new characters, Ezra, Hera, Kanan, Zeb, Chopper, like we've never seen any of these characters before. So, and after the show, so it's kind of like, well, do they live? Do they survive? You know what I mean? Like, and where were they doing the original trilogy? Now you have all these questions, and you really didn't know. And I think, like you said, the show was very streamlined. It wasn't, you didn't necessarily have to go off on all these different missions, because in Clone Wars, you had droids going off on different missions. You had Ahsoka on her own mission sometimes. You had Anakin on his own thing, Obi-Wan, so on and so forth. So you had all these split missions, and yes, there were filler episodes too, but Rebels was more streamlined, so I could understand why a person would kind of, vibe with that a little bit more than Clone Wars.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, Clone Wars had like 22 episodes per season. Clone Wars only had like, I don't actually remember, like 14, 16, something like that. Yeah, it was something. It was there was still a lot, but it wasn't that insane. And it only went 4 seasons. Clone Wars went 7, so I could see that. Well, we actually took we actually answered that. Yeah, we even have Dragonfly Mask. Okay, he's got a bunch of chats in here. Well, we're getting to them. There's a lot of chats today already out the gate. We haven't even gotten to our main thoughts yet, and already.
Well, I figured as much because
Yeah, this is a big one. This is a big one. It's a brand new show, and we've gotten a lot more subscribers. Which, by the way, I want to welcome everybody that is subscribing and that's watching on YouTube and on Twitch. We have our Twitch followers too. That's awesome. So yeah, this is kind of a big first show. Ronaldo says things I didn't like. The writing was not great at all. Absolutely. That's like my biggest one. The writing's horrible in this show. Many things didn't make sense. I understand that this is Rebel Season 5, but that doesn't mean it needs to be written like a cartoon. Oh, dude, you hit the nail on the head. And honestly, that's one of the biggest complaints that I'm seeing from everybody that's putting out videos right now. Especially a lot of guys like your Campia, your Burnett's, all those guys who are actually in the industry. That was one of the first things that they picked up on too. And that is, again, Filoni has to start to learn. When you're making a live action show, man, you can't write it like a cartoon. The stuff that works in animation does not work in live action. That's just kind of the thing. The other thing that I'll say, like right off the bat, was the performances in a lot of cases sort of reminded me of the prequel trilogy. Very stiff, very wooden, very, just not dynamic. And then some of that, of course, is because it's on the volume, which is another criticism that a lot of people had too. That was another thing I noticed. You didn't have a lot of, like, the blocking in this is terrible. You can't really move because you can't see with something like Andor, when you're shooting in practical locations, you could do a lot more with blocking. You can move the camera around. You could do stuff. On the volume, you're somewhat limited. The other problem I had is, you're getting me started now, but everything was so clean. There was no atmosphere in this at all. Because you can't. You can't do that because it'll mess with the volumes, like,
the sensors.
The sensors, yeah, and all this, like, trackers and all that other stuff, so you can have a lot of atmosphere. So everything looks unnaturally clean in this. And again, if Disney and Lucasfilm is going to continue to make these shows, they have to get off the volume. They have to stop relying on it so heavy. Because honestly, now, I will say this, it was not as, even though, it's funny because Campia was like, the CGI was among the worst he has ever seen. And
Yes, that
and
was my biggest. That was my biggest
it
issue.
it's terrible. I mean, there's times where you can actually see like the lines and stuff like that. I mean, it's bad, right? But the other part of that is, besides everything looking ultra clean and the CGI being bad and all this other stuff, it's like, the over reliance on it. I mean, it looked like the set pieces look good, I mean, so it's almost like there's a trade off, right? So, like, for every one or two bad things, there's something that's also good about it. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
as bad as it was, I don't think it suffered as badly as Obi-Wan did. There was still, but it was still
don't
pretty
know.
bad.
I don't know, man. I mean, here's my thing. So some of my issues, and I had a chance to, I had to be HR and listen to David's grievances, and it's not like I don't disagree with him on some things. I
Surprised
think
he's not
that,
here yet. He hasn't chatted in yet.
yeah. So the thing is that I think that with certain characters, you're missing dynamics. Absolutely, that was one of his biggest gripes. I'm gonna air them out for him.
Oh,
I'm
David
throwing
is
him a bone
here.
here.
He just popped in.
Oh,
Yeah.
so yeah, some of his gripes.
No,
were the
Daryl
fact
has
that,
not admitted defeat yet. I'll get to him in a minute.
Yeah, whatever. So, the thing is that when you look at Sabine, for example, like Sabine, I expected more energy from her because she's Sabine. It's like certain characters I expected more energy from, others I didn't. Like, I know he had a gripe with Ahsoka being so deadpan and kind of
I
quiet.
agree. I totally agree with him. I mean, dude,
I don't.
you look at the animated version. Okay, look, I'm not even going to go with the Clone Wars version. I mean, maybe I'll go slightly with season 7. And then if you go to Rebels, it's not so much that she was, not like super animated, but she wasn't the same. She wasn't even the same as she was in like The Mandalorian. And that's like during the same time period.
Exactly. But see, my thing is, and I understand, for me, I understand why. It's because where she is in the story. And that's why I felt like, because of where she is in the story, in the sense of, she still has that great sense of loss and dread. She's more, she's saddened because, of course, she's coming to the realization of, okay, she left Anakin, she left the Jedi Order, she left Sabine, and so she's kind of regretful, and she's still trying to be the wise, and you don't want to be like, I don't want to say like a wise and like almost a Obi-Wan or something like that, but we used to her being, a little bit more fiery, like in the Clone Wars when she was younger. But as we saw her maturation, she became more serious.
Yeah.
In Rebels, she became more serious.
But here's what
even
somebody
more to
pointed
the-
out.
Mhm.
I forgot which person it was, but somebody pointed this out. That it doesn't make sense because they said, okay, I think it was Harloff that pointed this out. Because that was something that I was going to forgive, but in a way, it's true. It's like, okay, you're going to pull this character back because he has a feeling what they're going to do is that they're going to try to show some growth like later in the series or something. So what you're doing is but that's cheap. You don't pull a character back just to give them pseudo growth. It's like you meet them where they were and then you grow them from there. But I will do this because in some that we just said at the beginning of the show, there's some things that I'm going to reserve for maybe like 3/4 of the way through the season, right? Because we really have no idea where these characters are going. Like by episode, it's like 8 episodes, right? So maybe like by episode 6, their attitudes in in this episode might actually make perfect sense. Like, oh, I get it now, and then we look like idiots for criticizing it, right? So but overall, I still found that the performances were completely stiff and wooden, and it was like, oh, look, hello, Lucas prequel trilogy all over again. Oh, Peter. He says, are we tired of the saber through the gut yet? Yeah, man. They are starting to overuse this a little bit. And here's the thing that I find funny about that. It's like virtually everybody is surviving this now. Now, granted, it was a little bit off to her right, and it, obviously it missed, I guess, most of the vital organs, right? Maybe a lung or two, but I don't know. I don't know.
The thing with that, though, is like with a lightsaber, I mean, there's only so many things that you're really going to do with it. I mean, you're either going to stab or cut, Now, I mean, you could behead a bunch of people, but then that would take the ratings up a little bit. It's not really for kids like that anymore. I mean, granted, I was surprised they did it in Revenge of the Sith, and they really didn't. Of course, they didn't show it per se. It was kind of like implied when Anakin lopped off Dooku's head. That's just to show, like, okay,
I don't even know if that's the
that he was
thing,
willing to go.
because it's not even so much like when Balin did it in the beginning and killed that guy. See, that makes sense. What I'm talking about is the people that get stabbed and survive all of a sudden. Like everybody. It's like, I mean, it just, to me, again, it's doing a lot of cheap storytelling things. Like they're just trying to, and again, I think it comes from Filoni's weakness as a writer for live action. But, we'll see. Ronaldo says, I read that Merrick is the name of a guy that hypnotized by a witch called Morgan in Arthurian mythology. Yes, that is true. I was reading that same thing, and the people that are theorizing that Ezra is actually Merrick, or Merrick, I'm still not really entirely sure the pronunciation of that one. But, yeah, the whole werewolf thing, a lot of the connections. Yes, actually, that was one of the biggest things, and that's why, Morgan Elsbeth, I mean, there's a little bit of a, like a thing. That's probably why they named that character, by the way. Ronaldo says, it's the type of show that I can understand if you hate it, and I can understand if you love it. It's so funny you bring that up, because I was thinking that before we started streaming tonight, when I was trying to put together some of my thoughts. I was like, you know what? If you hated the show, I could see that. If you love the show, I could see that. Because again, I want to, as many problems as we're going over, I didn't expect to just like start the show with all these issues. Because look, we have them. Both Daryl and I have our lists of issues with this show. But I still have to say, overall, I think story-wise, it's a really good show. I think it's definitely continuing Rebels. As far as being Rebels Season 5, I think it's doing a phenomenal job at that. A lot of the problems that they have, I mean, you can, unlike some of the other shows, you could overlook these. Because, again, it is what Star Wars should be. It's fun, it's adventurous, it's carrying the mythology, not without problems, not without problems, but it is doing it. Okay, now we get to, this Dragonfly Mask is giving us a lot of comments so far. So now we get to the first one that he put. He said, I like the saber fights. Very Kurosawa, with the pacing of strike and reset. Yeah, actually. And then, of course, that was one of Lucas's main influences. So I like, and that's another thing I should point out too. I like the fact that they are starting to put some of these influences that Lucas had when he created Star Wars back into this show. I think that that's one of the problems that Disney has had thus far, is that they don't necessarily, it's almost like they're trying too hard to forge their own path, if that makes sense. They're trying to distance themselves. Kathleen Kennedy even said, yeah, we're trying to move beyond Lucas's thing. Now, granted, on one hand, you don't want to be boxed in where you're forever trapped in this little tiny box of everything. But at the same time, you also don't want to throw away what made Star Wars Star Wars. You don't want to do that. So from that standpoint, I do agree that maybe it's better to start to see some of these influences, and that's what Filoni does well. Again, I still think he needs more practice writing for a live action series. He's brilliant at animation, but the weaknesses are starting to show where he is popping up with all kinds of issues when it comes to live action. But again, I don't think it's necessarily anything super detrimental. I think he could get past these. Dragonfly Mask also goes on to say, I think Merrick is a red herring. Star Wars is known for having cool character with scene presence that don't actually move the plot forward. And that's possible. I mean, look, if you actually just sort of read the synopsis of this guy, he was essentially one of Vader's Inquisitors that survived, and they're making use of him. And you know what? That might be all he is. By the way, I just want to give some props to the little Loth cat that I mean, dude, really, he's like the MVP of this show to me. I love the fact that they brought the Loth cat into live action. Now, if you guys don't know, they did show Lothal finally in live action, which was a huge planet. Wasn't that where Ezra was from? I think that's where Ezra was from. So,
yeah.
Ezra was from that planet. There were Loth wolves, Loth cats. The Loth cat, man, I just lost my mind every scene that he was in. All right, Peter says, I'm just a Shin fan. I think I could bring her to the light side. Okay, yeah, Shin.
Somebody has a crush.
Well, and you know what? Okay, so look, I mean, let's be honest. None of us would kick her out of bed. But at the same time, I have to say this. Her and Balin are probably the true MVPs of this series so far. I mean, it's too bad that Ray Stevenson passed away, before the show even premiered, because he gives this amazing performance, and his character is nuanced. He's obviously not a bloodthirsty guy. He's not super evil. But he does have a mission. He must do what must be done. And it seems to me, and again, we all know how Star Wars loves its redemption stories, right? So I could see a universe where Balin and Shin maybe flip, kind of like what the chicken Obi-Wan, Kiva? The one that Moses Ingram. Reva. Yes, everybody. That's why I have a Star Wars show, because I'm so up on this stuff. So, yeah, Reva, she sort of had to change her heart because she was the same thing. She was a Jedi that, turned into an Inquisitor, because that's what a lot of Jedi did after Order 66. But Shin is sort of interesting because she's got to only be like 20, 22 or something like she was born probably around Order 66. So I hope they delve a little bit more into that Balin Shin dynamic in that storyline. I really do. Oh my goodness, dude. He's like, this is the first time our chats have gone to a page 2. Like they're just coming in. All right, so Dragonfly Mask. He says, I hope we get a flashback about Ezra and Thrawn surviving. Something similar to Enemy Mine. That would be cool. That would be cool because one of the things that I think that the Book of Boba Fett did correctly, maybe a little too long, maybe you don't like the way they handled it, but I like the way that they actually flash back to how he got out of the Sarlacc pit. You and I both talked about that extensively. They have to show that. It's not enough. And I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit there with the Ezra Thrawn thing. I mean, sure, they had the whole epilogue after Rebels, but I don't know. Do you think that we need to see a little bit more of that, or do you think it's fine if we just leave it the way it is?
As far as what? Like how
Well, as far as,
I mean,
so we know that Ezra sort of sacrificed himself and he shot him like way out or whatever, and then Ezra and Thrawn are like lost in this other galaxy or whatever. But
right.
and now we're at the point that we're at now, which of course you could discover stuff, but again, they did in this show actually played a little bit with that epilogue. They showed a couple of scenes and changed them slightly. And so I'm thinking, what Dragonfly's saying is like, look, maybe we could get a little bit of a flashback about what happened with Ezra and Thrawn, how they survived, a little bit where they are. And we could get that because, look, we know that Thrawn's going to be in this, and flashbacks could be part of it. But the question is, do we really need that, or could we just move forward with the task at hand, as it were?
I don't think for a flashback for that, because, and as far as them surviving, it's like, what's to survive? It's not like for Boba Fett that made sense because he fell into a man eating or whatever eating, because a Sarlacc is going to eat anything that's in his way, basically. So I can understand that, but all the thing that happened is they shot into another part of the galaxy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I can see that.
at this point now, and that's why they're trying to find him right now. So I mean, I'm sure we're going to get, once they find him, it's like, okay, Ezra's probably going to tell his story as far as like, all right, this is what I've been doing out here, or whatever the case may be. This is how I've been surviving and doing my, living life, if he's still alive, which I'm sure he is. So that part, yeah, we'll get that probably like in some sort of line or whatever. But I mean, I really don't need to see him getting shot out because then to space, because we already saw that. So it's like, okay, well then what?
Fair enough. Ronaldo says 100% you need to watch Rebels. I think Dave wanted to do like an episode 4-ish type story with events from the past being mentioned in the present. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm starting to think that a lot of this is his plan all along. I mean, we don't know how long this has been in development, but we know that he's wanted to do a live action thing. He just needs to learn how to write it, that's all. Dragonfly Mass said, Rebels is my favorite animated show. I really look forward to Ezra as a druid-type Jedi. He goes on to say, each session got shorter with episodes during Rebels. Yeah, I mean, it would be... I'm really looking forward to the most to seeing where Ezra is even at, right? Because if you remember Rebels, he was tempted by the dark side quite a bit, actually. I mean, to the point where he was, like, this close to being Maul's apprentice. He was... I mean... There was a lot of, and he had to use the dark side to help open that Sith holocron for Maul. I mean, there was a lot of, like, dark side stuff going on with him. So I'm really curious now that he's under this influence with Thrawn and all that. Because, look, Thrawn, even in Rebels, had his own version of what the Jedi should be. And he wasn't entirely wrong, either. So, Ronaldo says, it was very prequel-ish dialogue, yeah. Yes, it was. And Dragonfly has a point. He says the prequels are very clean, too. That's part of the space opera aesthetics. See, I would agree with that, except for this. The reason why the prequels is clean was because Lucas wanted to represent this more regal time where, everything was flourishing. There was no war. Well, I mean, there was after the Clone Wars started, but that's when things started to get more lived in, right? So by the time you get to episode 4, it's a very lived in universe. And things are war torn, and he wanted to show that. And of course, this is happening after the Empire falls, a New Republic rises. To put it mildly, things are a mess. Now, you could make the argument that there are some worlds that maybe aren't touched as heavily by that. But I don't know. Any of the source material I've seen, whether it's been in Legends, New Canon, some of the other stuff, it was like very few things were untouched by the war there. Let's see. Dragonfly Mask also says, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon are all very clean and colorful. Yes, and that's what Lucas wanted to basically get away from. His complaint was that most sci-fi was too clinical, was what he actually said. clean, clinical, sterile was another word that Lucas used. He wanted to show a universe that was a lot more lived in, dirty. There's been a war. A war is very dirty. Things have been lived in. Things have been used. Okay. Now we get to David. David says, hello, gentlemen. Thank God it's Friday. It's Star Wars Day. Sorry I'm late. Did Daryl admit defeat yet? Did y'all see that monstrosity? Was I right about being bad? Does it mean y'all buy me a coffee? Oh, David. First of all, well, you know what? I'm not even going to go there yet. But again, were there some problems? Absolutely. And we've been talking about them. But no, the show in of itself is not bad. Okay? It just has issues. Now, there's a lot of them. I mean, there's not a shortage of them. We're going to admit that. We're going to be fair, and we're going to admit that. But, it's not a bad show. Dragonfly says, all the characters seem pretty depressed, like they are suffering from loss.
Well, I mean,
he's not wrong. Yeah,
he's not wrong. Yeah.
He goes on to say they may have won, but it still looks like it took a lot out of them. He says it might be 5 years or more since episode 6, but the mood of the galaxy is still coming back into itself. And I like that. I like that. I like the idea that, because usually that's what you get, right? I mean, whenever you're talking about some sort of a thing to where, the good guys win a battle, all of a sudden everything's great and everybody's back to normal. And this is actually showing no. I mean, you do have some problems.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like what I loved about the Adventures is when they, it's like, okay, yeah, the Adventures save, the planet or whatever, New York or whatnot, but then, no, it's Sokovia. And then it's like, okay, well, then they had to come up with those, because it's like, okay, well, in your, what you did, though, it's like, okay, there's a lot of damage that you all caused that may have been able to been prevented, or maybe you guys could have gone about it a different way. So that's why they came up with the whole Sokovia Accords. And I thought that was great, because it's like now you're holding superheroes accountable for their actions. Where in times past, it's like, oh, Superman could pretty much knock over a building in New York, in Metropolis somewhere, and like no one bats an eye. But it's like, okay, there's like, 20,000 people in that building. But are we going to talk about that? No.
Well, the billions of dollars worth of damage too. I mean, it's like,
exactly.
Somebody's got to pay for this. It's not Superman.
Yeah, the cleanup is going to be ridiculous.
Exactly. I'm glad you stayed away from Batman, given that David's watching. So Dragonfly's like, only 3 or 4 people have survived versus a nearly dozen who have died from stabs and slashes in the films. Yeah, that may be, but the bottom line is, when you look at the films, maybe except the sequel, I'm trying to think of the sequel trilogy. Was anybody stabbed in the sequel trilogy?
Yeah, Kylo, but then Rey healed him.
Yeah, Rey healed him, exactly. So you look at the movies, like Qui-Gon, he was the first one that we actually saw getting stabbed. You also have to understand that, I'm coming from like 20 additional years of the Legends books, right? Lightsabers were just a lot more deadly. Now it just seems in this small window, a period of time where you have like a couple of years of Disney putting out content, it just seems like an exorbitant amount of people are surviving. Now, you could spin that as saying, okay, well, they're just trying to be a little bit more realistic, right? Because, look, I mean, the bottom line is, when we first saw episode 4, we thought that lightsabers vaporized people. I mean, if you look at the whole, like, Vader striking Obi-Wan, now, we later learned that Obi-Wan just kind of disappeared before the contact hit, but it didn't look that way. And there was no internet, no nothing to correct us back then. So we just thought, oh, well, just don't let these things touch you. And then they've evolved them. Because don't forget, too, that when Lucas first created these, one of the reasons why they fought the way they did was he was like, no, lightsabers are really heavy, like a broadsword and all that stuff. Then he lightened it up, no pun intended, a little bit. for Empire and Return of the Jedi, but then by the time he gets to the prequel trilogy, he's like, oh no, now they're nearly weightless. So a lot of this is just filmmakers' prerogative, and now you have to try to explain it through the universe, basically. Now we got Ted Adam Green. He says, as a pharmacist, I had a lot of classes on human anatomy and the wounds of different people make sense to me. A lightsaber is like a gunshot. Depending on where it is, it's survivable or not. It's awesome that this is actually causing a lot of discussion. The other thing you have to look at, too, is that it cauterizes.
Yeah, but the other part about it is, you got to look at, like, context, though. So it's like, okay, Sabine got stabbed with a lightsaber. Okay, they were on a planet where they had, obviously a medical facility that they weren't far from. So okay, they got her there in time to where they was able to save her. I mean, like, look at Luke. He got mauled by a whole, Wampa, and he survived. But because they got him into a bacta tank. I mean, as long as you can get the medical attention that you need, you possibly could survive that. Now, the part that's insane is what we talked about, and we continually talk about, is the fact that Maul got lopped in half, and then he still survived.
And he fell down a shaft. He fell down a shaft.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, so not only did he get lopped in half and he's falling, but the part that his upper torso survived the fact that he made this 100-foot drop and his head didn't splatter all over the ground. That's the part that's a little bit okay.
Well, here's the other part. Here's the other part for me where I don't know. It's like I can hang with it either way. Like it's not going to be a thing to where I'm going to obsess about it. But I will say this though. You can't compare a lightsaber to a gunshot. I'm just saying. A gunshot is a little bitty projectile that goes through and, does a little. Now, of course, if it's one of those like, like armor piercing ones where it like flattens on impact and then it goes through and it just rips through your entire body. Yeah, okay, now that's a little bit different. But can we just admit that a lightsaber, which is the very same thing, by the way, that's going through Durasteel doors and turning them essentially into molten metal. Okay, that's doing that in your body too, right? So if you stab somebody with a lightsaber, it's essentially cooking and doing all sorts of damage to your lungs, to your, like, everything that's in there. Now, again, you can medically make the argument that it's cauterizing as it's doing this. And then, like you said, of course, because, the medicine at the time, look, I'm sure, lightsaber wounds are a thing that medical droids have seen. And can I take a few minutes to say how cool it is that we're actually debating this? Like, this is the kind of geeky, weird discussion that honestly I do enjoy doing. But
it's like Star Wars Grey's Anatomy edition.
Yeah, exactly. This is just fantastic. This is the dream that I had when we created this community. This is the kind of discussion we would get into. But again, I could go either way on that. I guess it's a situational thing. And you're right. I mean, Sabine's near a medical facility. I guess, you call the Star Wars EMS and you're probably good. All right. David says the series started off great. Rey's force choke was the Godfather in space. After Ahsoka's first fight, it was bad. Rey and the robots are the only ones that demonstrated they knew how to act. Well, yeah. Again, with some of the problems, I will say, I'll be the first person to admit, Ray Stevenson was probably the best part of this whole thing. And I promise we will get into a lot of our issues. But the chats are just so good tonight. Ted Edward Green says, Qui-Gon was to the spine. Sabine was still on the on the lightsaber thing. Sabine was to the side and self-cauterizing. I brought that up before I read your comment. Had she been cut, it would have been more damage, but a stab, not so much. And that, yeah, I guess if you compare that to a sword, you could basically say the same thing, right? Like a stab wound, you can. I mean, there was even a thing to where when I was getting ready to, there's a possibility when I was doing bands and stuff that we were going to actually be able to go over to Japan and play. And the guitar player was like giving me this whole thing. He was like, okay, carry a piece of plastic with you, like saran wrap or something like that. I'm like, okay, why? He goes, well, if you get stabbed, you put it on you and it'll actually suck it into the wound and it'll, like, it was really a bizarre thing, but I'm like, okie dokie. Maybe avoid getting stabbed. That would be the first thing. All right, so Ronaldo says, I like the dialogue and interactions because I see the show as another season of Rebels, similar to how I see the prequels as Clone Wars episodes. Basically a cartoon with real people. Must be nice. Peter says, I have to give the MVPs to Wang and Chopper. Yeah, man. And then, of course, Ronaldo concurs.
Yeah, Yang and Chopper were cool.
They were, especially Wang. I mean, I loved Wang.
Yeah.
Peter says, when Chopper gave that flex after making the throw, that was great. Ted Adam Green says, Chopper is my hero, and Wang was just delightful. So, yeah, I mean, and look, Huang was, for those who don't know, he was actually in the Clone Wars series. He, he's like this Jedi professor droid that's been around for like 25,000 years. He's trained like every Padawan in existence, including Mace, Yoda, like all those guys. So he's seen a lot. And this is a good example, by the way, of fan service actually serving the story as well as giving us the warm and fuzzies. And that is, it makes perfect sense that Ahsoka would enlist this guy's help. I mean, why wouldn't you? He's like a walking encyclopedia of all the Jedi, right? So, absolutely. And, I mean, it was just spot on. Because, at first when you see him in the cockpit, you think, oh, man, another droid for comic relief. This is going to be like, a diet K2SO. But he wasn't. And they ported him over correctly. And yeah. And of course, Chopper. We did see Chopper in a cameo in Rogue One. But it was nice to see him being the Chopper that we knew in Rebels.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ronaldo says, ooh, they need to explain how they survived. I remember the space whales broke the ship's windows before they went to hyperspace. How do you come back from that? He's talking about Ezra and Thrawn.
Yeah, and Thrawn.
I don't know. Maybe that is a good point. But I don't necessarily...
Probably some shielding or whatever.
Well, and again, I don't... So here's the thing, and I'm going to split the difference. So you're saying, look, we don't need to see it at all. Other people are saying we need to see it. I don't know if I necessarily need to see it, but they should probably at least explain it. I mean, Peter Griffin will like this because I'm about to make a Family Guy reference. If Thrawn was just kind of like, yeah, remember the time that we, that kind of thing. That would be cool, right?
Really grinds my gears is when.
Exactly. All right, so Ronaldo says, by the way, there's a scene where Balin looks at the sky and you can barely see one of those stupid space whales. Yes, I caught that, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just seeing things or whatever, and it's true. They put one in there. That was a space whale that you actually saw in there. They did drop that. That was not your imagination. It was there. So, take that for what it's worth. So Dragonfly Mask. That's true, Eric. Also, just want to add, this is my first time checking you guys out, and you're both chill. Well, thank you, man. You know what? That's what we want to do, man. We want, more people to check us out. And, like I said, this is basically a community where we're all just getting together and talking about Star Wars. We're not like some new show or anything like that. Clearly, because half the time, sometimes we actually have to ask you guys. I mean, that's the thing I hate to admit it, but it's true. Thank goodness Ronaldo comes in there sometimes. He sets us straight. And speaking of Ronaldo, he said, I saw this with my brother who hasn't seen Rebels, and when they were talking about everything that happened with Thrawn and Ezra, he said, I guess you understand. Yeah. You want to add something?
I was gonna say, like, here are some of my good points.
You're trying to get to him.
Bad.
You're like tired of all these chats. You're like, dude, I want to get this off my chest.
I'm not tired of them, not at all. I'm just saying that
we finally get the community in the chats we want. You're like, listen, dude, time is money here. I got some points I want to make. I just steamroll the chats. Let's go.
No, but I think this is what's gonna shift the conversation to, like, what we really, I won't say shift it because we're still talking about the show, but getting more in depth into it. And that's one, I think a lot of the issues that I saw are because of two things. One being it's a TV show budget. So some things aren't going to be as grand as if you had the movie budget, so to speak. I'm hoping that's the reason. You brought up the volume. Like I said, the whole, a lot of this looked like video game. Like, this will feel like cutscenes from video games.
Cutscenes from a video game is exactly what I was thinking.
That was the thing that took me out of it.
Look at Andor, though. Andor found a way to shoot on practical sets, and The Mandalorian Season 2 actually wasn't bad.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, because Andor was on a practical set, and I think that's because I forgot who, Tony Gilroy. That's the one who did Andor, right?
Mm-hmm.
He that was his thing. He wasn't going to do the show unless it was done on practical sets. Like, that was his kind of his stipulation for doing the show. And I think, in some aspects that's the director's prerogative. I think the volume is cool. It is, but I think you can't be too reliant on it. Exactly. And that's what I see is becoming the problem with the technology is you're becoming too reliant on these things. And it works for Mandalorian because, quite frankly, Mandalorian, 90% of it takes place on desert planets or things that don't have a whole lot of life to it. I mean, now granted, yes, you did have like the Vietnam looking planet, and then you had some of the ship stuff, when they're on, like when they broke that one character out of jail or whatever, which was one of my favorite episodes. But by and large, it's like, all right, you're on these planets that really don't have a whole lot of scenery to them, so you can kind of get away with that, in my opinion. I don't know a whole lot about the technology that goes into it, but it seems like when you don't have a whole lot of things that the computer has to process, it probably likes that because,
well, here's the thing. So and this is probably what you're getting at, is the fact that, look, use the volume to do two things. One, supplement certain things that, you need to do because you just don't have the budget. Okay, that's number one. Two, maybe some of the more fantastical type planets or something where it's a little bit, like, it would just be way too costly or time consuming to build this stuff. You could do it with the volume because, again,
right,
it's not just the other things that suffer when you use the volume is you're blocking, blocking the actors. You can't do a lot of camera movement. You can't have them move around a lot. One of the people that actually did a show, it was the funniest thing in the world. They said if you want to like get completely obliterated within a half hour, do this drinking game where every time a character like folds their arms, like Watson just folds their arms and stands there, take a shot, and you'll be drunk within 20 minutes. And a lot of that is because you can't block. You can't do a lot of atmospheres. So there are things where the volume is definitely appropriate, and it could save you money, and it could actually be advantageous because it could allow you to do things that would either be too costly or just aren't practical to do. But it's the reliance on it, and I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, definitely. It's too much. It's too heavy on that. And Star Wars has always kind of built itself on being in a practical um,
Mm-hmm.
setting.
Absolutely.
Um, the other thing, the music didn't stand out to me at all, except the one part when Sabine's riding on it, and I felt like I was watching Top Gun
I know
when
I
she
was
was like
still.
on a
Oh
speeder and this
man, I
punk
thought
rock
the
music.
same
I was just
thing.
like,
I thought the
what in
same
God's
thing.
name
I
are they
know, and
doing?
you know what it reminded me. That was one of the things in my note. It's funny because inadvertently, thanks to all these great chats that we're getting, I mean, I'm systematically just like I'm going out of order, but I'm covering everything in the notes. One of my notes was that just so screamed to me the new Star
Hmm.
Trek with Captain Kirk and the Beastie Boys song.
Oh, right.
You know, it's the
Exactly.
same kind of thing. You know, it's like, here's the rebellious character, and we're going to play the heavier music and, you know, do all that. Now, I will say this, it was nice to actually see the live action E Wings. So, this is the first time in
Hmm.
live action we've ever seen an E Wing. That was cool. But
Yeah,
yes, I mean, that scene, I'm just sitting there watching this going, seriously? What am I watching right now?
exactly.
All right, to that end,
Exactly.
David says the show's not bad despite the bad action, awful acting, and Ahsoka looking like she ain't want to come to work. Man, I tell you, man, David, you have no idea how forward I look to your chats. Explain how the three chicks are acting their butts off and explain how the action's great. Look, I can't. Okay? I just got through saying, but you weren't here. Just want to note that. The acting was a little wooden. It was a little stiff. It kind of reminded me of the prequel trilogies.
Yeah, it was very choppy.
Or yeah, it was very choppy. It was, you know, it lacked dynamics. It it's almost like Kathleen Kennedy, you know, she has that whole thing, the force is female. She's always trying to create these like pseudo male female characters. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing a little bit of that here because, you know, a lot of times one of the criticisms of female heroes is, you know, and to me, this is what the strengths of females are, right? They're very in tune with their emotions. They're, you know, they tend to do all the stuff that we know that women tend to do. They're removing that and trying to make them, you know, stoic and emotionless like guys, but it comes off weird. The action, I thought that, you know, some of the action wasn't great, but I thought some of it was very good. I thought there was some good scenes. I'll tell you one scene that drove me insane. One scene that drove me nuts. It was in episode 2, the second episode. And they set it up perfectly. Now, the guy that was, when they went to Corellia, right?
Hmm.
Peter Jacobson was the actor who portrayed like the head of that facility,
Yeah,
that
the
shipyard. Okay?
hmm
So he was the head of the shipyard. Peter Jacobson is actually one of the actors that I really love. I guess I could say he's one of my favorites. He was in Colony. He came on my radar when he did House. He was one of the guys that came in the later seasons of House. I think he stole the show. He's a great actor. He's a fantastic character actor. And I thought that he played this role to perfection because basically what
yeah.
you had is you had a bunch of guys that were former Imperials that were pretty much still Imperials, but working under the guise of the New Republic and trying to sell it like, hey, man, you know, we don't care about the politics. As long as the money's good, you know, we're good. We're just doing our jobs. Okay, fine. Now, you build up all this suspense because I thought that the second episode was really good. In fact, the whole show, I thought, actually did a pretty good job at building suspense at the appropriate times. But you build all the suspense. You know, you know that Hera and Ahsoka are kind of in the lion's den because you got
Hmm.
all these Imperials and they're trying to like, no man, you can't see that. It's classified, all that stuff, right? Okay, it was perfect. But what happened? The idiot starts yelling for the Empire, and then to go, it's like, dude, just shoot her. That was one of the stupid, and it's funny because, you know, I thought, okay, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just me. Every YouTube show I watched that reviewed this series all pointed out that scene and how stupid that was. The other stupid scene that I had in my notes is that beginning scene. Now, granted, I will admit that opening scene was probably the most filmic. You know why? Because it was essentially a ripoff of Return of the Jedi. That's why. You know? It's kind of like, okay, a shuttle's going to try to get clearance on a ship. Oh, it's an older Jedi code. It's like, yeah, older code, but it still checks out. Yeah, I've seen that before. You know,
Right.
There's a lot of derivative stuff. But here's the dumb thing. Yeah, I don't really believe they're Jedi. Hey, I got an idea. Let's invite them on the ship. Let's let them land. It's like, dude, you don't know. That ship could be a bomb. You don't know what's going to walk out of there. You're coming out with 6 guys acting all smug, thinking that, it's like, it's just stuff like that. I'm like, okay, come on. This is just so stupid.
Well, yeah. I mean, I get the fact that, I get the fact that, they're kind of started to build their own arrogance in a way, just like how the Empire did too. I mean, that's the problem when you have government. I mean, that's just the bottom line of it. It's
Yeah,
like
but
when you
that,
have
I can't think. Look, I get the arrogance part, and I know that's what they were trying to portray, but I just, I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, I get it.
I'm going to let it go.
Um,
I'm going to need, like, what's a blood pressure pill? Our pharmacist friend, Ted, you would know. Tenorman, probably. Ronaldo says, so, they have this device that they need to somehow decipher to complete a map. Again, yes, it's another criticism I have. Should they take it to a broker or specialist? Nah, let's give it to the artist, because why not? Yes. Dude, Ronaldo, we're like on the same page today. And by the way, you're also on the same page as a lot of these other reviewers, too. Because Campio was the one that was kind of like, you're Hera. You basically have the entire might of the New Republic. You have all the best code crackers. You have all these people, who are there. Are you going to give the map to them? No? Sabine could probably do it. And again, it's just, they're doing it because they need to give Ahsoka a reason to go to Sabine so they could reunite and be trained. Well, look, there's a bunch of different ways you could do that without being idiots. See, that's the thing. It's called good writing, good storytelling. Lucas did it. I mean, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to breathe. All right. Ted basically says, Hwang giving the forceless Sabine the lightsaber and telling her to take it and go is the only validation Sabine needs. That droid has served more Jedi than any other ever.
True.
Yeah.
I thought he was actually going to start teaching her himself.
That's
honestly.
what I thought too. I thought the same thing.
But I love the fact that, and this is the part that this is like one of my favorite parts, honestly, is when he basically told us, it's like, oh yeah, no, as far as your acuity for the Force, you're the worst person I've ever seen.
No.
Like
and
you're
let's talk
terrible.
about that. Let's talk about the humor in this, because the humor was great. I mean, when there was, right? When it wasn't a bunch of wooden, stiff performances. The humor was actually funny. Like that whole thing when he was deciphering the bomb, and it's like, well, yeah, you could say that. You're a hologram.
Because you're a hologram. Right.
That was cool. I mean, the Star Wars humor was intact. That's why, again, I have to say, and you said the same thing, and we've said this in, private conversation before we were streaming, that one of the other differences, too, is, again, you can't really just, even though we've been doing a pretty good job so far, you can't crucify a show off of 2 episodes. You can point out the things that are wrong that could possibly carry out throughout the season, but we don't know where any of this is going. And the other thing that you have to point out, too, is that, yes, it is implied. Again, I still don't know. I know Kanan trained Sabine a little bit because she needed to know how to use the Darksaber because she had it. And so he basically taught her combat skills with it. But, I mean, we'll have to see. All right, Ronaldo. Ronaldo says, the characters in the show, Oh no, this guy inside a spaceship using an old code from an order that doesn't exist anymore were bad people. Who would have believed it? Yeah, again. Because, and you could go either way on this stuff, right? Because one of the differences between this particular show and some of the other ones is that, even though we're having a little bit of fun, like just, criticizing it or whatever, more so than a lot of other people on the internet, like The Critical Drinker, he's another show that I absolutely love watching. Man, he just shredded this show. And I'm not prepared to go that far because I still enjoyed it. I still really love the show, and I could overlook a lot of this stuff because, yeah, there were big problems. The writing was a problem, the CGI is a problem. There's a lot of problems, but when you just kind of look past that and get into the story, I think that they're going to do something really exciting. So,
Here are the good things about Ahsoka. So we've kind of teared on it, and there's more things we could obviously tear on about it. But the positives of the show. One, I love how they brought a lot of things from Rebels into live action. They paid attention to a lot of nuance, which I love. I like the fact that the casting, like the look of the characters, and Eric, you and I talked about this the other day when they had that whole mural of the saviors of Lothal. Like I loved how when you really look at the characters, they all look like who they're supposed to be. Um, I love that aspect of it. Even when Sabine cut her hair, I know David didn't like the fact that she cut her hair, but that's what she did in the actual show Rebels.
yeah, you had to get
That's
you had to
the
get
look
her to that point.
you had to get her back to that point. Um, and it fits better under the helmet. Let's just be honest. Um, then some of the things is that like I said, we talked about Huang, we talked about Chopper. Those were great additions.
The
Balin,
Loth Cat.
oh
Gotta love
yes,
the
you have the
Loth
Loth
Cat.
Cat.
I
The
love my
Loth Cat is
Loth
like the
Cat,
new
man.
a Loth Cat is like a new Porg, basically.
Better.
Um,
He's better than a Porg.
um, um, and then, like I said, like you said, the overall story of it all, like okay, we're trying to find Ezra. I mean, and in some ways, it is a stretch. I will agree that it is a stretch to like, why would you give a star map to Sabine to try to figure out? The only thing about it is that because it had like art on it that I just here.
Well, let
And
me
I
skip
do
ahead.
recall.
Let me just skip ahead real quick to Dragonfly Mask because he addresses what you're talking about. So I want you to be able to incorporate his comments in this. He says, "Look, can we agree a map maker is an artist? So why not give it to an artist? Also, Sabine has shown in Rebels that she is clever and good natural instincts."
True. And to couple with that, um in Rebels, when they were trying to find that whole like, granted this is more artistic, but when they were trying to find the world between worlds, like that one guy who I actually remember the guy that was like questioning her and asking her to help to, but he was with Thrawn and all them.
Mm-hmm.
He was basically trying to get her to unlock the thing. He's like, okay, I know you're an artist. I know you can figure this stuff out. Like, what does this stuff mean? That's actually the same guy who we see in Rogue One when he's bowing before Vader when he's in the back of the tank. Same guy.
Ah,
But anyway, like she's,
flexing a little trivial knowledge. That's good.
well, I do what I can.
You do. You do, and you do it well.
Thank you, sir. But the thing is that it kind of makes sense because Sabine is always looking for things beyond what they seem. So it's like, okay, the fact that this little orb had all these different type of markings on it, and it's like, okay, they knew it was a star map, but it's like it wasn't just a star map. It's like, okay, how do you unlock the star map? And because there's certain things on it, it's like, okay, well, how do these play with each other pretty much in order for us to even unlock the star map? So to a degree, I can understand that. Um, And like, yes, it is a cheap way of getting, okay, Ahsoka needs her help now, so this is how we're going to get this reunion going.
Yeah, I mean, it would have made more sense to me if you're gonna do that. Again, I mean, it wasn't something that it was an observation that I had because you see this in so many other films, TV series, or whatever that, it's like, okay, instead of the ginormous resources that you have, you're going to gamble on this. I mean, you could look at it from that standpoint. You could also, I think a balance would have been maybe, okay, you give it to them, nobody could figure it out, so you give it to her. It's like a last resort or something. I mean, to me,
Mm-hmm.
that would have made more sense. I don't necessarily think that, cartography
I think,
and deciphering this is something. The other thing, too, and, you can comment on this, too. It's like, really, another map to another main character. Hello, Force Awakens. It's nice to see you again.
well, I mean, it's Star Wars. I mean, like, what do you expect? I mean, like, we always talk about they keep replacing story tropes all the time. I mean, of course, why not?
Rise of
You know, what I mean,
Skywalker.
yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like
I don't know,
they
man.
repeat
I can tell
themes
you
and stuff
this.
all the time.
People tell me this, but here's my rebuttal to that. Okay. There is like 20 years of books that they now brand legends. And I'll even
Mhm.
include the new canon books in the comics. You never get these recycled storylines. Why is it that these people can come up with compelling original stories, but the movie makers and all that can't? Now, of course, the knee-jerk reaction to that is going to be, well, you can do whatever you want in books or whatever. When it comes to movies, it's like, well, I don't know, man. We're kind of in a point in time now where you could pretty much do whatever you want in movies, So that's not the limitation that it used to be. So that's, my only real criticism, I guess, from that.
That's
But
fair.
again, that didn't bother me too bad because I know, like, I get it. It's not a documentary, it's a story.
That's those broad strokes you want.
That's it. So, Dragonfly Mass says, look, they have to find the right balance between the volume and practical locations, and absolutely 100% agree. Another person chatting, Swagger Like Us. After 5 years since Rebels epilogue, I couldn't have asked for a better start for Ahsoka. Well, if you're talking story-wise, I would 100% agree. Like, I think where the story is going, and again, these little nitpicky criticisms that we have about is really more about, the writing and the execution and some of that stuff. But much like what you and I always talk about with the prequels, we love the prequels as
Mhm.
far as storyline goes. Just a little of the execution.
What I fear is because as we always say that Filoni is the heir apparent to George Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
and that's very much true, and sometimes to a fault. Because what I don't want to happen, what seems to kind of start to happen already, but we'll see, is that you know, phenomenal storyteller, just bad director.
Yeah.
And that because my thing is just like, why didn't you catch any of this? Like, why did anyone catch any of these things?
Right. You have
Especially
all these
someone like
professionals
Favreau.
there. It's like, look, if we're catching it,
Right.
why aren't you catching it?
Exactly.
And yeah.
These guys, this is how you make your living, and you're professionals. You guys went to school, and you guys, got degrees at the wazoo and all that. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but it's like, if we're the audience who have probably less than a third of the knowledge that you guys have, theoretically speaking, why is it that this is so apparent to us and not to you?
Well, and I think it's multiple things, right? Because being in production, both of us, we
Hmm.
know that sometimes the intent is unfortunately hindered by just the stuff that happens. Now, of course,
The bureaucracy of,
well, and the more
yes.
professional that you are and the more money, let's face it, the more money you throw at something, the more problems go away. But
Hmm.
there's just a lot of things that end up happening that, you just have to go with. It's a mishap. Like the sandstorms that actually rose in
A
uh
New Hope.
yeah. when they were shooting all the
Mhm.
Tatooine scenes.
In Tunisia, yeah.
Yeah, in Tunisia, and where they destroyed like half the sets and they had to rebuild. I mean, stuff
Mhm.
happens, right? So you have
Right.
to overcome these things, and there are some things I wish I could. There's a couple of examples actually that are really interesting. And of course, I don't remember them now, but I do remember reading a couple of things that actually altered certain storylines because of production issues.
Mhm.
And they just, well, all right, we're just going to have to write around this. So you
Mhm.
do have to allow a certain amount for that. Okay, so
Yep.
David comes in, he says, "What am I missing? The acting and action in an art and genre that is literally acting and action is bad, and you can't defend it. But I'm wrong about the show being bad so far, but you just said you liked it so far."
Well, so here's the thing. Um,
This is gonna get good.
it's kind of like a person. A person like you and David, you being a teacher at one point. Um, sometimes you have kids who are really good kids, but they do bad stuff. And it's like you just need to get them away and try to figure out how to rebrand them or
That's
repurpose like
good.
their energy.
That's
And
very
that's
good.
essentially, well, you know.
No, that's a great analogy, man.
This is why I have the high ground.
There
But
you go.
but that's, and that's essentially what's happening in Ahsoka. So it's like you're once again like because I know my brother, he's very black and white. So it's like if this is bad, then this is bad, then it must be this way. And it's like, yes, you would ultimately think that, but there's enough good. It's almost like how Luke looked at Vader. It's like, okay, out of all the atrocities that Vader did, it's like he still saw good in his father because he knew it was there. He just needed to figure a way how to get it out of him, and ultimately he did. That's the thing. How we feel about Star Wars a lot of times is that there are good things in Star Wars that overall can outweigh the bad, but it doesn't mean that there aren't problems with it. It's just the fact that it's like, okay, how do we move forward? How do you correct those problems? Now, if the problems continue, then obviously, then at some point you do have to concede that it is bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you try to save a child as much as you possibly can, but eventually, if they just end up, living a life of crime, I mean, then you just have to just say, oh, well, they're just, until they decide they wanted to turn it around. But at to a certain point, you can see that okay, there's still good in this. There's still some things that are well done, and you just need to figure out how to clean those things up.
Well, and I'm gonna go a step further because so that's all on point, right? But I also think the difference, particularly with David and us, it's great when we know somebody so well, right? It's
Hmm.
like, I mean, it's a little bit harder if it's somebody that either hasn't been chatting into the show for a while or we don't know him in real life. But David, we do. So here's the thing: we actually have consumed a lot of the Star Wars content, so we have like this
Hmm.
bigger picture. So I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that we can overlook a lot of things because the story and where that story is fitting into the overall lore of the franchise is either really good, maybe it's really exciting. Um, there's just something of value about it that you can edit out some of these other things because to be honest, most of what we're talking about here is production issues or maybe poor execution or bad writing. And look, again, this is stuff that would torpedo anything else. And it's not being a Star Wars apologist as much as it is overlooking the things because of the greater story. You go, oh, there's some interesting things happening here. When you take Balin and Shin, for
Hmm.
instance, there's some really cool nuggets here. There's some great characters here. There's
Hmm.
some dynamics at play. Hera is really portrayed well, I think. Now, it's funny because
Hmm.
the actress who portrays her is actually Ewan McGregor's wife. So
Wow.
she's married to Obi-Wan. So, there is that, right? So that family, the Force is strong in that family because Ewan McGregor's uncle is Wedge. So, you have like a whole generation of Star Wars people. But the point is, you have people that really love this franchise that are willing to put a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of effort into their character that they're playing or, whatever. And for all of Filoni's faults, and look, his faults are mostly because the bottom line is he's just inexperienced with live action. He's not ready for prime time yet. He's getting there, but not yet. But he'll get better. He will get better. He's like a master of animation and storytelling for that medium. Once he really learns, and the only way, unfortunately, you learn is by doing it. And nothing, you could complain about a lot of the things, but it's not quite.
Especially in production.
Yeah. Absolutely. All
or
right,
music for that.
Sure. All right. So now, Swagger Like Us, he basically says, I contend Hera, Sabine, and Ahsoka are female characters done right. All of them had to overcome flaws over multiple seasons. But again, I think the important distinction here is that the benefit of all these characters that you mentioned, we've lived with for a while thanks to Rebels. And there is a little bit of a difference between the way that they're portrayed in Rebels and the way they're portrayed in live action. Now, again, while we have pointed out some of the flaws in that, I don't necessarily think that just dooms them for the rest of the show. Again, like I think, and quite frankly, there's going to be people now, from everything that I've read and everything that I've watched so far on YouTube, there's not a whole lot of people that feel this way, but I did read a bunch of IMDb comments. Because again, before doing this show, I really wanted to get a feel for how the overall fan base was feeling about this show. And you have a lot of people that just absolutely adore it. And that's because they did, like you said, Daryl, they made great casting choices as far as bringing these characters into live action. And they're doing a good job. So I think that, oh, and then Ted. Ted was like, to Norman is correct. Thank you. And then Swagger's basically like, Sabine is a character who deciphered the iconography on Lethal's temple into the world between worlds. So, yep. Still defending Sabine. And that's true. But again, and sure, Hera was around for all that stuff. But my only point is, because the world between worlds was a little... look, if you really want to go back to it, I also have a problem with the fact that the only map to this guy's location is something that was created like 1,000 years ago. It's like, dude, they're implying that they're in the unknown regions. That's what they're implying.
Right.
But even the unknown regions, when you look at the High Republic, has been pretty,
prevalent.
Yeah, there's like wild space. That's basically where the Yuuzhan Vong are. But, the unknown regions, that's where the Chiss, that's where all these guys are. I don't know. Again, I want to see how a lot of this stuff plays out. I'm gonna reserve like too heavy criticism because again, I don't want to give the impression that I didn't enjoy the show, and I fear that the way that I've been ranting and raving like a lunatic during this episode tonight, people might get that impression. I kind of sound like David when we're talking about Andor, but I did enjoy this episode. It was a lot of fun. I thought that the show's good. It's off to a great start. There's just a lot of problems that can't be ignored. And I think my concern is the same as yours. You hope that you can sort of explain these and maybe they'll go away by episode 3 or 4. It's like, as again, there's a lot riding on this. And because we love this franchise so much, the last thing we need is something else for I guess to destroy the popularity of the show. Ronaldo says, it's a bit weird that the map to find Thrawn is in an ancient temple. It's so funny. He's like reading my mind tonight. But there might be an explanation for that. Yeah, well, it's funny because, so that temple, what's that? It's like the planet or city. It's like Arcana or something like that.
Well, no, they were over at Sita. Talking about the one when they
The
when they
Arcana
stuck the
temple,
thing.
though. So the temple
You talking
actually.
about the one Ahsoka went into, or you talking
Yeah.
about the one when they were at the little ruins? Oh, okay.
No. The temple that Ahsoka went to. I'm pretty sure that was because that was one of those like ancient, and it's actually modeled, if I'm not mistaken, after it was like a temple in Jedi Fallen Order. I don't remember. There's like another race of beings or something that created it. I don't remember what it was. Because remember, I have Fallen Order. I just didn't play through it, but I watched all the cutscenes at one point. And there was like a lot in there. And it was funny because if you actually look at those like weird decaying statues or whatever, it was a lot like the father, the daughter, and the son from Mortis.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really wondering if they're going to start to bring a little bit more of that stuff into this, which, I would be all about. Okay, so now Peter, he's given us some more chats. He said, I don't know about Ahsoka taking some of Cal's abilities and Morgan being a Night Sister. Now I want to see Merrin versus Morgan, Battle of the Night Sisters. So for those who don't know, Merrin is a Night Sister that pops up in Jedi Fallen Order. I thought I would add a little context to that. And yeah, I mean, on one hand, I think it is cool that they are bringing the Night Sisters into all this because, again, one of the criticisms that I've personally had over the years is that the expanded universe, some of the other outlying mediums, like some of the comics and stuff like that, would create all these amazing characters and we never get to see them. Well, now we're seeing them.
Yeah, we got the Night Sisters in Clone Wars, and then...
But I mean like a live action thing, though.
Well, about live action, though, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about stuff in live action. Because, quite frankly, that's really where it matters most. As much as people shouldn't, because the animated shows are incredible, a lot of the casual people just dismiss them as cartoons. That's what they call them. It drives me nuts. They're like, oh, you watch those Star Wars cartoons? I'm like, animated series. And then, of course, they look at me like, I just got done playing D&D or something. I'm one of those guys, right? Which I do love that, by the way. Peter's like, wait, who loved the prequels? All right, now love is a strong word. But the stories, yeah. I mean, if you go back and watch our review, which we did this whole, like, what is Star Wars series. And we went through, the first episode, of course, was, the background of Star Wars, like what Lucas's vision was and all that stuff, and kind of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. And then we went through because we got a bunch of new people watching tonight. If you guys are into this stuff, well, first of all, hit the like button because that does help us out. But secondly, not right now, but when we're done, at your leisure, go back and check out our whole What is Star Wars series because we went through and we reviewed all the films. Like, including the standalone ones. And the prequels, I mean, they had a really good story. The problem was, you brought it up with Lucas, he should have gotten other people to direct them. He should have just taken care of the stories. You can also make the argument that maybe they shouldn't have started Anakin out as a little kid. Maybe, like, episode 2 should have been episode 1. And then take, like, a really solid Clone Wars episode and make that episode 2. And then you have episode 3, and that probably would have been a better thing. But, you say he was just kidding. And then Dragonfly's like, this guy, episode 2 is my jam. And then Peter responds and says, I always tell the sequel haters they should have seen us with the prequels, right? I mean, that is so true, man, because the way that a lot of people feel about the sequels now is exactly the way that people felt about the prequels in the beginning. I mean, it's so funny how, Hayden Christensen and all these guys are getting all this love now, and people are going back to the prequels and go, oh, they weren't that bad because the sequels now are out, and everybody's like, oh, let me take a second look at those prequels. But back then when they were released, oh yeah, they just got butchered. Unfairly so for a lot of I mean, maybe not totally, but again, if you watch the reviews, you guys will see all of our thoughts on that. Dragonfly's like, Boba Fett was my favorite OG character, so getting his origin story was awesome, and I was introduced to my favorite Jedi, Kit Fisto. Kit Fisto. He's, he was the guy, we always loved him, right? Because he always had a smile on his face.
Yeah, he reminded me like, and the fact that he's like from a water planet, he kind of reminded me of a surfer.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
You know what? I never really thought about that, but that's a good point. Because he kind of had that "what me worries" sort of vibe to him. Yeah. He was great. And actually, if you go into a lot of the more expanded universe stuff, there's some great stuff that features Kid Fisto, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Boba Fett. Yeah. And look, for some of the issues that the Book of Boba Fett had, I thought it was really nice to see a little bit more of, okay, he gets out of the Sarlacc pit, and, he runs into the Sand People and all that. And look, you can argue that maybe they dragged that on a little too long or whatever, but it was a cool story, All right, David. Oh, David. Gentlemen, I like Starbucks if you want to put it in my head-to-head gift box. You all always beat me, but when it's over, you are going to owe me a coffee. Okay, so now he's carrying this to the end of, and for those of you who don't know, I'm not gonna go into my whole like little commercial and stuff like that, but we do have membership packages where you can support us at various dollar amounts per month, and David supports us at the Jedi Master level, and so that's what he's talking about. And essentially, he's determined that we're gonna owe him something by the end of this series. Swagger's like, I feel like the map, it reveals the location, not Thrawn's GPS coordinates.
Yeah, it's more like you're just out there in that region. Like, how do you get to the unknown regions, basically?
Yeah, kind of like the Exegol thing in a way, right?
Yeah, but like once you get out there, I mean, you're not just gonna like end up on Thrawn Island or something like that,
Thrawn Island. He's like Mr. Rourke, like the whole Fantasy Island thing. As a little tattoo or Ugnaughta's tattoo.
Right, there you go.
So David said, I wasn't saying like the show. I was trying to quote you all saying you like the show despite the stuff I mentioned. Yeah, all right. Ronaldo says, personally, I overlook some things because Star Wars is like pizza to me. It's good even when it's bad. Well, Ronaldo, you overlook a lot of the stuff in The Last Jedi is one of your favorite Star Wars films of all time. So the fact that you overlook stuff, I think goes without saying. But, we love you, man. He goes on to say, also some flaws are things we've seen before, like the dialogue. And I'm like, well, it's fine. And yeah, I mean, I guess, it is funny how that is, because now we've gotten to the point where we actually see certain familiar flaws, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you're like, oh, this again. Okay, here's the new thing I'm going to overlook. And that's, and again, I think as long as they tell a good story, that's not just a good story within itself, but also expands the lore a little bit. And this is where I think Disney Plus, well, at least the shows, and Disney overall, like the Disney Lucasfilm thing. One of the things that I think that they are doing correctly, because this is also true in the comic books that they've been releasing over the last couple of years. This is true with the novels that they've been releasing over the last 2 or 3 years. They're doing a really good job of expanding the lore and expanding the universe. And they're tying a lot of this stuff together. They're including things in the game. Like, look, there was the Eye of Sion, as they call it, right? The Eye of Sion that's a reference to Darth Sion, who was from Knights of the Old Republic too. He was kind of like a zombie Sith. And, even that ship, right? It kind of looks like a bigger version of the little ring thing that we saw Obi-Wan go into when he was trying to, take his little Jedi fighter and go further than what the fighter would normally go. But that big thing was really a lot like the Outbound Flight. There was a Timothy Zahn novel called Outbound Flight, which basically had a very similar type of a ship. So, I mean, they are bringing in things from the expanded universe, from their own canon, from some of the games. I mean, they're really trying to expand, like the return of the HK droids. That's something I wanted to bring up today, too. HK-47 was one of the funniest droids in Knights of the Old Republic, and they brought the HK series back in. So, you got all kinds of really cool stuff here. Let's see what we got. Ronaldo, you enjoyed the show the same way you enjoyed Rise of Skywalker? Oh, that's good. By the way, I think Daryl's frozen. I think he's frozen in carbonite, everybody. I think we might have lost him. I'm sure he'll pop back in. But that's a good question. I think I enjoyed it more in the sense of the Rise of Skywalker was just a really fun ride. The Rise of Skywalker was something that was, the main problem with that one was the pacing was just crazy. But I'm just going to text Daryl really quick and tell him that he's frozen. But I do actually enjoy Ahsoka more for the potential that it has. Like, there's a lot of ingredients they have that are good, but I think that the potential that it has is just really good, and whether they live up to that potential is the big question that we're going to have. So those are the things that I think, you just have to look out for. But that's a good call. Oh, yes, Peter. Peter says Zepho. Yes, the Zepho. That's what they're called. Those are the guys that built that temple that the Arcana Temple is very reminiscent of. Well, at least, I don't know if they actually built them, but that's the style of that temple is very much like that. Yes, thank you. Swagger says, look at Andor. A great story. You're going to make David mad. Great screenwriting, amazing acting, great practical sets, etc. However, the first 5 episodes, most would said are boring. My point is nothing's perfect. No, that's true. Because look, we pointed out a lot of the things that were bad about Andor. And we're not, there is no such thing as a perfect show. You could probably say that The Empire Strikes Back is probably, if you're just dealing with the Star Wars universe, The Empire Strikes Back is probably the closest to perfection you're going to get. That said, it's not about it being perfect, really. It's not about an absolute, because Andor, I would say, is another one that's up there. Daryl and I have always said, look, just give us a great story, good execution, great writing, acting. Just give us these elements. It's possible. They've done it in other films. The problem is that I think that Kathleen Kennedy seems to have some sort of an agenda. She's micromanaging. She's firing directors like halfway into a project. There's all kinds of stuff that I think goes into why a lot of these latest projects haven't been good, and over-reliance on the volume. In the case of some of the films, they rushed them. Sure, back then you had to take 3 years to make the film because, let's face it, it took that long just to do it based on the technology that was there. But, okay, so Daryl's working on coming back. But you also have to look at the standpoint of, these guys are, it's like a $40 billion company. They're hiring the best of the best. At least that's what they're supposed to do. There's just some problems that, quite frankly, at that level are just, I don't know, man. It's kind of inexcusable. That's all I'm saying. It's, I don't know what else I could say about that one. Let's see. Oh, it's awesome. You guys are actually talking amongst yourselves in here. I love it. Okay, so Swagger goes on. Question, Daryl and Eric, what Star Wars story would you want for a future Disney Plus project? That's a good question, actually. When Daryl pops in, he could give his answer. The problem is, I've actually said in the past, like a bunch of different ones that I wouldn't mind having. And of course, now I'm blanking. I remember them. Okay, here's one. Here's one that I think would actually be good, just off the top of my head. So you guys know that they were going to make a Solo 2 and a Solo 3. And it was going to deal very much with the furthering bonding or friendship or whatever of Lando and Han. But more interestingly, it was also going to explore more Darth Maul heading up the Crimson Dawn organization. And Kira and her rise to power. Because I don't know if you guys are into the comics at all, but man, if you guys read some of the latest, like Crimson Reign, War of the Bounty Hunters, there was one that was like right after that was kind of part of the same thing, but it really talks about, it takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and it talks about how Kira took over Crimson Dawn, and basically, she got like Han Solo's frozen body or whatever, like before Jabba did. So it was like a lot happened, and it was great writing, really good adventures. Another one, I was just thinking about this today, because there was a very much of an Indiana Jones vibe to the Ahsoka series for a minute when she was on Arcana, and she was getting that thing, right? And I don't know if you guys are familiar with a character called Dr. Aphra, but Dr. Aphra is another character that so far, I don't know if she's made into the novels or not, but she has been in the comics. She has her own comic series. She was hooked up with Vader for a while, as not really as apprentice, but somebody that just does like jobs for him. And the Dr. Aphra series, she's kind of like the Indiana Jones of the Star Wars universe. And she's a really funny, fun, somewhat complex character. So all the stories are great. I would love to see a Disney Plus show on Dr. Aphra. So give me, maybe instead of making Solo 2 and Solo 3, give me a limited Solo series. Or give me a Dr. Aphra comics. And, look, they were talking about at one point of making a Palpatine origin story movie, which would be really cool too. Don't know if I need that in a film. Give me that in a Disney Plus series. So hopefully, that gives you guys an idea of sort of what I'm thinking there. Dragonfly, and we'll get, if Daryl pops back on, we'll get his thoughts in there too. Dragonfly is like, I also enjoyed Clone Palpatine in the novels. Yeah, absolutely. For the movies, I do believe they could have done it better, maybe with a bit more foreshadowing. Well, here's the problem. The problem with the sequel trilogy is that they didn't plan it at all. Instead of getting the directors that they wanted to do it, and the writers, in some cases, they were the same person. But you had Lawrence Kasdan in there. You had, what's his kid's name? Jason or something? They should have just planned it. They should have just said, look, here's the beginning, middle, and end. Now, each of the directors with their films, it's like, you got to start here, and you got to get us to this point. What you do in the middle, that's up to you. And then the next one, it's like, okay, you're starting here, now you got to get us to this point. So just frame out the story, but they didn't do that. And what made it even worse was Colin Trevorrow was originally supposed to do The Rise of Skywalker. It was supposed to be Duel of the Fates. The script is leaked online. We actually did a show on it. It was a while ago, like a year and a half ago. But I mean, it's still on the channel if you guys dig it up. You know, just go on our channel, search Duel of the Fates. It's there. Where we go very much in depth, almost scene by scene of here's Duel of the Fates versus Rise of Skywalker, and Palpatine wasn't even there. He was never meant to be resurrected. And then the other problem I had was that when Palpatine was resurrected, you know, it just, and again, you guys can watch you watch a review of The Rise of Skywalker, I promise you, it's amazing. If you guys enjoy tonight's show, you'll love our review of The Rise of Skywalker. We're in rare form on that one. I mean, again, we enjoyed it. It was a fun ride, fun movie to watch, but we point out the problems. But one of the things is that, you know, when you found out what Palpatine's announcement was, it was like in a Fortnite game. It's like, guys, you know, if you're going to bring something up in a film or whatever, you got to give it to us in that film. You know, don't make me have to read a certain comic or play a game or something like that in order to get context. Now, if you want to enrich something or give something further context, like I'll give you guys a good example. And by the way, this would be another good Disney Plus show. If you guys ever read the novel Catalyst, which is the prequel to Rogue One, it's incredible. And if you actually had read Catalyst before seeing Rogue One, I mean, it just totally enriches the whole experience. But it's not necessary, really. Like, it gives a little bit more context. It enriches a storyline for sure, but it's not like it's required reading. Swaggers basically says, great points. I appreciate that. I try. David, positives. Ahsoka looks exactly like Ahsoka. Yeah, that was something that we thought when she first premiered in The Mandalorian Season 2. The main cast looks great, besides that weird-looking chick with the red lightsaber. All right, you're talking about Shin. The robots, droids, are good. Rey, Balin, is good, despite the bad writing and bad directing. All right, so, I mean, you know, we're pretty much on the same page, right? I mean, that's... And again, I mean, when you say only bad director, only bad writing or something, yes, I know that's a big deal. You know, I'm not trying to pretend that it isn't. But at the same time, again, as much fun as we've had sort of picking this thing apart today, it is important to realize this is 2 episodes out of 8. We don't really know where they're going. I think by episode 6, maybe we look at these 2 episodes a little differently. I don't know. Swagger says, love Charles Soule's comics too. His novels are incredible as well. All right, so now the chats have slowed down a little bit. Let me just see if there's anything in my notes here that I wanted to bring up, you know, before, because I don't know if Daryl's going to be back or not, but I wanted to bring this stuff up. Let's see. Yeah. So far we talked about all that. Oh, the opening crawl. I thought the fact that they put in an opening crawl. Now, granted, it's not the same as the one that we're used to in the films, but I think it was cool that they actually brought that element back in, because again, it definitely gives you some context to where you're at. That's one of the criticisms I sometimes have of some of the other Star Wars properties, is like, okay, unless you're familiar with what's going on, you just have no idea where you're at with this stuff. And then, yeah, Ronaldo says that opening crawl is very cool. Yeah, I agree. It's very, very cool. Balin's orange lightsaber, you know, we haven't talked about that much. The thing that's interesting about that, and of course, you know, Huang actually looked that up and, you know, sort of identified it, but they didn't give us a whole lot of information on it. And here, you can look at a bigger still of Daryl now. It's a little bit longer in the hilt, and it seems like it's a little bit heavier. And then also the orange blade. So I'm really looking forward to how they're going to explain that. Why is it orange? You know, what's the deal? I mean, they basically glossed over that in the first and second episodes, but I'm just wondering if they're going to, bring that up. The other thing is, I brought this up earlier. It was kind of cool how they turned around the rescue of Morgan, and they sort of took the Leia rescue from episode 4 and kind of flipped it around. And they also included a little bit of a homage to the Phantom Menace in that one. Because if you look at, even the way that Baylan talked in there, he almost sounded like Qui-Gon. It was weird. But it was very much like when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan landed on that Federation ship. So that was cool. Now, is there anything else I need to bring up in here? Okay, yeah. Where I talked about Ahsoka was on Arcana, which is a colony established by the Night Sisters of Dathomir. Oh yeah, that was what I wanted to bring up, and I sort of alluded to this earlier. So the Night Sisters were actually introduced in the courtship of Princess Leia, which, again, when you first read the synopsis of the book, it just kind of sounds like a young adult romance novel or something with Han and Leia. It's basically like, so Han and Leia are together, but she was actually promised to some other prince or something, and it was like, it would have caused some weird war if she doesn't marry him or whatever. So on the surface, it sounds a little cheesy, but it's actually one of the better novels. I ended up reading it just because somebody told me there's a lot of canonical things in it. Well, as much as the expanded universe was. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, that star map is very much like the star maps in the Knights of the Old Republic. We alluded to that. Ahsoka, of course, is still using the Fulcrum name, which I thought was something that was very interesting about this. It makes me wonder, is she going to continue using that name? Is that going to have any other further meaning? Because, remember, the original Fulcrum in Rebels was a pretty nasty guy, and he eventually flipped. He kind of pulled a Hux in a way. He ended up flipping, and he was the codename Fulcrum, like this Rebel spy. And then later on in Rebels, or he might have been in Clone Wars, and then in Rebels, that might have been it. Basically picked it up. So I thought that was cool. Admiral Akbar having a cameo was nice. Oh yeah, I forgot about this too. See, this is why it's good that I write this stuff down. It was nice to see that Governor Ryder Azadi and Jai Cal was in there. They were like the governor and assistant or whatever, Lothal. And they were actually voiced by, or at least Azadi was, voiced by the same actor. Oh, what else we got? I already went over the Loth Cat. Oh, and then there was that scene with Shin, how she was sending out that probe droid, and that was so reminiscent of Darth Maul. I went over a lot of this stuff. Okay. So let me get to a couple more of these chats. I'll give you guys a couple of closing thoughts, and then, we'll wrap it up until Monday. And by the way, Monday, what we're going to talk about is, it's sort of a continuation of this discussion in a way. We're going to talk about whether or not they should bring the Yuuzhan Vong into the Ahsoka series. So if you guys are up on them, then, you might want to do that. I actually did a show on that probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago or something about just bringing the Yuuzhan Vong into new canon. But yeah, Daryl suggested that, maybe we should, because, they're in the unknown regions. Let's just say the door is open to do that. All right. So Ronaldo says, do you think Merrick is Star Killer? I don't. Like I said, there's a lot of theories going around as far as who he is. And that one's okay. I think the Ezra one, although I get it, I think that explanation maybe is a little bit weak. For him being Star Killer, I guess that would be a way to bring Star Killer into this current, what a lot of people are calling the Filoni-verse, which is sort of like a subsection of the Star Wars universe. But, I don't know. In some ways, I just hope he's his own guy, honestly. But at the same time, he was once Vader's apprentice, much like, Ahsoka was Anakin's apprentice, so that would work. Let's see. Oh, my light went out. All kinds of stuff are happening to me today. So Dragonfly says, since John and David have been making Star Wars, we've got a lot of Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2 references. And I agree. I think definitely that you're going to see a lot more of that, because much like most of the Star Wars fans, those guys were really big fans of those two games. And look, there's a lot of really good stuff in there, a lot of good stuff in there. Dragonfly says, yo, the Vong. I think the Grisk equals the Vong. You know what? I thought the same thing. So I read the whole Thrawn Ascendancy. At least I read the first book. I still got the other 2 books in that trilogy to go. But, dude, I was thinking the exact same thing. When I was reading those books, and I'm reading about the Grisk, and the Grisk have actually popped up in other stuff, too. I think they were even in the High Republic stuff, if I'm not mistaken. But they pop up periodically, and they so remind me of the Yuuzhan Vong. But, the Yuuzhan Vong are just kind of cool. We'll talk about that Monday. Swagger's like, talking to Ronaldo, it perfectly matches up with Ahsoka's Master and Apprentice theme. Absolutely. Peter brings up Starkiller, also known as Galen Merrick. I mean, you're putting out some good evidence. Dragonfly, there is a species in the Acolyte trailer that look like the Vong. I noticed that. And then Swagger follows that up by saying, the yin and yang symbolism is everywhere in Ahsoka. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff that you guys are bringing up that, unlike a lot of the theories, honestly, actually makes a lot of sense to me. Because, some people put out, like, you guys remember that whole thing about how everybody was convinced that Mace Windu was Snoke? That was kind of reaching. It's like, okay, I mean, really? But, even when you read some of the evidence, or my other favorite, which actually I kind of wish this were true, is that Jar Jar was a Sith Lord that was actually the puppet master of the whole thing. And then they sort of put the scenes and, everything that was talking about, like, all the evidence that they had or whatever. And it actually made you sit there and go, got a point. If you actually read scenes a certain way, like that whole from a certain point of view, it could be. So we'll have to see. Again, it's still too early, because there is a big part of me, honestly, that hopes that Merrick is just a really cool new character. That, he doesn't necessarily have to be, because, that's another trap that we fall into as well. Everybody's got to be somebody's kid, or, related to this person, or they were apprentice to that. And the problem with that is it ends up shrinking the universe a little bit. Where it would be nice to expand it. I mean, again, that's kind of a cool Easter eggy kind of thing. If Merrick actually was Starkiller, or, I don't know, him being Ezra might be a little bit of a stretch, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, some of that stuff is actually kind of cool. Having Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter made sense just from the whole overpowered thing, but, we'll just have to see. But I did leave this poll here. A lot of you guys voted, and you know what? Everybody overwhelmingly, and I know David must not have voted, because I don't think he would have put this, but so far he's saying it's great. The Ahsoka series is great. So I think that this is pretty much going to wrap it up. It's too bad Daryl didn't come back, but you know what? I'm going to get the answer to this as far as what shows that he would like to see maybe become Disney Plus shows or whatever. and we'll put it in the Discord, because you guys, we can keep these conversations going in our Discord server. So if you join, the link is in the description. Become a member. There's like different membership levels and stuff like that. You guys can become members of the Discord, and it would actually we can continue this conversation there. I mean, you can also play Call of Duty with me over there too when I'm on. That's another thing. So you guys might want to do that. Again, won't bog you down with the commercial, but if you guys, just wanted to throw us a couple of bucks or actually become a member, Buy Me a Coffee link is also in the description, so you guys can check that out. And then, of course, before we go, Swagger's saying Sam Witwer is also in the credits. So that's important. But it may or may not be because, again, yeah, he played Maul. I think he voiced the Emperor, actually, in something too. He's been a bunch of different characters because he's a really good voice actor. Another fun fact, he played, it wasn't Darkseid. He was in Smallville. That was actually where I first saw him years ago. Oh, who was it? Doomsday. Yeah, he played Doomsday in Smallville. And then he ended up doing a bunch of voices. He voiced Darth Maul in Solo. So, I mean, his presence in there could mean he's either voicing some cool characters, or it could mean that a fan favorite's going to pop up. So we'll have to see. But with that, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Be sure to join us Monday night, 8 o'clock. Actually, no. We're pre-recording a show because I got to work, and I'm about to wrap up the show and you popped in. But now that you're actually in, there is one question that the guys had. And that is, what would you like to see turned into a Disney Plus show? If you can have anything. Are you there? This is great. You gotta love it, guys. We're producing on the fly. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, it's a little choppy.
Yeah, I see that. So if you could, as far as like Disney Plus shows, so everybody wants to know, like, as I already gave my picks, but what would you like to see turned into a Disney Plus show, if anything? Oh, it's gone again. All right, well, I'll find out off the air, and basically we'll throw it in the Discord. So make sure you guys join the Discord. Oh, and you're back just long enough to actually wrap this thing up, because it's kind of choppy anyway. So, and that's good, because I always hate doing this by myself. All right? So until Monday, it's going to be a pre-recorded episode, but we can chat in. So it's going to premiere at 8 o'clock. You guys can chat in. We're going to be talking about should the Yuuzhan Vong be in Ahsoka. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.